What's up guys, you're watching the Bass is Good channel and welcome to the next video. So this time I'm going to explain all the information you would want to know before buying and installing your first subwoofer setup. Okay, so starting out with subwoofers, they come in many different sizes. When someone says, "Yo, I have two 12s in the trunk," when they say 12, they are referring to the diameter in inches. 10s and 12s seem to be the most popular. They also make square subwoofers as well. Hey, check out this 22-inch super woofer for $10,000. Now that's insane. Next, you will find the power rating, and there are two different ones, peak power and RMS power. Peak power is not very realistic. The speaker can only handle this amount of power in short bursts. However, the RMS power is what the speaker can handle constantly, and is usually about half of the peak power rating, so RMS is more realistic and the one to go off of. Also, in case you were wondering, RMS stands for root meets square, which is a rather complicated mathematical formula. A lot of lower end car audio brands will advertise their products with peak power, and you won't see the RMS rating unless you look further into the fine print. The next thing you will want to find is the amount of ohms and voice coils it has. Ohms is a unit of electrical resistance, and most subwoofers have 2 or 4 ohms per voice coil. I'll explain more on ohms and how they relate to amplifiers in a moment. Voice coils are electromagnets that push and pull the cone very quickly, which creates sound. They are essentially the motor of the speaker. Subwoofers will have 1 or 2 separate voice coils. Having 2 voice coils will basically give you more options for wiring. Alright, so now on to amplifiers. There are different classes of amplifiers. The typical ones you will find in cars are Class A. These produce very good audio quality, but are not very efficient and produce a lot of heat. Class B amplifiers are pretty much the opposite, more efficient, but the sound quality is not as good. There's also Class A/B amplifiers, which provides good middle ground between the two. Then there is Class D amps. These are highly efficient but have a lot of distortion at high frequencies, so this class is perfect for subwoofers since they only produce lows. Amplifiers can have multiple channels. Typically one channel, or sometimes called monoblock amps, are used for subwoofers. 2 or more channel amps can produce stereo, and each channel can be controlled independently. You can generally bridge 2 channels together, which combines the power into one output. There is usually a symbol above the terminals that shows where to connect for bridging, but not all amps are able to do this, and it can also change the ohm load it will be able to handle. Make sure to check the user manual for more info on this. The mute it turn on feature prevents a thump noise every time you turn the car on. Most amplifiers come with a built-in crossover. Low pass filters cut out the high frequency and high pass filters cut out the lows. There's usually a knob to select which frequency you want to start cutting out at. Amplifiers will have low-level RCA inputs, which are typically used with aftermarket head units. And most of the time they will also have high-level inputs as well. These inputs will splice into your factory speaker wiring when you're using the stock head unit. You may see some amplifiers that have a MOSFET power supply. MOSFET stands for metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor. These fancy transistors are known for their ability to handle more power. Okay, so how exactly do subs and amps relate to each other? It's really simple. As resistance, measured in ohms, goes up, the wattage your amp can supply goes down. For example, if we take this single voice coil 4 ohm power-based subwoofer and pair it with this Rockford Fosgate 500 watt amplifier, we would be only pushing 300 watts RMS, because in order to get the full 500, we would need to have a 2 ohm subwoofer. The wattage output for different ohm loads with your amplifier can usually be found in the description, on the box, or in the instruction booklet. So having one single voice coil subwoofer is the simplest to figure out, but it'll get a bit more complicated when you add more than one voice coils or subwoofers. Okay, so let's say you have 2 4 ohm voice coils, and it really doesn't matter if they are on one subwoofer or if they are 2 separate single ohm subwoofers. You can either wire them in series or parallel. Wiring them in parallel will cause the final resistance to be 2 ohms and looks like this. The positive output terminal on the amp will go to the positive terminal on both of the voice coils, and then the negative terminals on both of the voice coils will connect to the negative terminal on the amp. And then wiring them in series will cause the final resistance to be 8 ohms and looks like this. The positive output terminal on the amp will go to the positive terminal on one of the voice coils, and then the negative terminal for that one will go to the positive terminal on the second voice coil, and then the negative terminal for that one will go back to the negative terminal on the amp. If you have 3 or more voice coils, you can wire them in a series and parallel setup to get the desired final resistance. In the description below, I will leave a link to a free speaker impedance calculator where you can calculate your final resistance. Also, if you want to make sure your subwoofer wiring is correct before hooking up to an amp, or you want to know what the resistance is on a voice coil, you can use a multimeter set to the 200 ohm range to measure the resistance. Usually it will not be exactly 2 or 4 ohms, but it should be pretty close. Okay, so moving on. Wiring. It's typically easiest if you get an amplifier wiring kit because it comes with everything you need to wire up the amp and sub. The power wire will come in different sizes depending on how many amps you plan on running. Wiring is measured in gauges. The lower the gauge number, the thicker the wire, which makes it a little bit confusing. Typically, you will find the recommended wire size in the description of the amplifier you're getting. But as a rule of thumb for a normal vehicle, you will need 10 gauge for 100 to 200 watts RMS, 8 gauge for 200 to 400, 4 gauge for 400 to 1000, and 0 gauge for over 1000. This is just a general guideline for a normal vehicle with the battery in the front. Basically, the longer distance electricity has to travel using direct current, the thicker the wiring needs to be. The reason you do not need as big of wiring for the actual subwoofer is because it's using alternating current. So if you have a battery in the trunk like most BMWs and the amp is close by, then you may not need as big of wiring as you normally would. Next, there are 3 types of subwoofer enclosures: sealed, ported, and bandpass. Sealed enclosures are the easiest to build. They typically take up less space, they have good all-around sound quality, but they are not as loud. Ported enclosures are a little harder to design and build. They take up more space, but they will be louder than sealed boxes. Bandpass boxes are basically like having an enclosure on both sides of the subwoofer. They take up lots of space and can output a lot of bass at a very specific frequency range, but they are very complicated to design and build. So in this video series, I will be showing you how to design and build your own custom ported subwoofer enclosure. But of course, it's much easier to buy a pre-made box that will fit your subwoofer, and you can also buy them already paired with a sub to make things even easier. Also, you should make sure you will be able to fit it in your vehicle. Well, that's about it for this video. I hope you guys found this information useful. And remember, if you're looking into getting some bass for your vehicle, I have made an entire video series on DIY subwoofer installation and sub box building. So be sure to check out that playlist right here. And I will see you guys later. Peace out.